just want to talk today a little bit about dwelling, this idea of dwelling being a kind of resting in beingness, and possibly a word that we can connect with if we're from a Christian background and not a non-dual background. Some people are struggling with the concept of non-duality or saying it's really new to me and I don't really understand it. It was new to me too. There's no way that I would have been introduced to this in the church. So it's only through stepping back from the church, stepping away from Christianity, that I discovered non-duality. And my introduction to it was through Rupert Spira, who I rate as a really great teacher. I do like him very much. It can be a little bit cerebral, maybe, too much for some, but I do think it makes it accessible. And I have noticed recently, just interestingly, that Rupert Spira, who started out in life, I think, as an Anglican, just maybe by default, by his sort of traditional family upbringing, but then went and travelled to the East and learnt the Vedanta tradition. I don't know what the Ramana Maharishi, I think. I don't really know a lot about these gurus, but certainly learned non-duality. And came back and became a sort of teacher to the Western audience, but in recent times has become interested in the Christian mystics and is starting to use the word God instead of consciousness, which is really interesting. So it's returning to your home tradition, but with a new understanding. And for people like me, that's really helpful because it means we can pick up the language if we want to from whatever we're familiar with, but with new understanding and with new meaning. So in non-duality, being, the ground of being, is what we would call God. And it's not something, it sort of invites you to move away from theism as you would have perhaps been used to it. Theism in the sense that, God is the Abrahamic religions, the theistic religions, Christianity, Judaism and Islam, tend to speak about God. Well, they do speak about God in dualistic terms, he. Or they have names for God, Jehovah, Allah, and Yahweh, and God is sort of out there. God is on his holy mountain somewhere, whether that's an old man in the sky or whether it's just an idea of a being. But certainly prayers are framed in a dualistic way. We pray to God, we say, oh Lord, and all the Psalms, all of the scripture of the Old and New Testament, it's dualistic, it's all story. That's what we spoke about last time. But if we think that God is being, and we can replace the word God for love and consciousness and being, this idea of dwelling in our beingness is a way of returning to God. It's not an endless search. The seeking stops. And we just come home. And the way to find God is returning home to the ground of all being, or home to your true essential nature, which kind of conflicts with a lot of how we think about ourselves. If we're from a Christian background, we think that our own nature is sinful. Human nature is fallen and it's sinful and corrupt. And the only way that we can be returned to God is through faith in Jesus, because he was the only one that was without sin. So that's the story and the message that we've received. And it brings a lot of baggage with it. So to think about the human nature, our essential nature being the divine, and God for many is blasphemous. So we can't get there with our mind. We just can't get to the right understanding with our mind. We can only get there with experience. And I was trying to explain this to somebody just a comment that somebody made on my last video. They were saying, who are you to say all of this? Why should I listen to what you say? You have your interpretation, but what credentials do you have? What's your academic background? Blah blah blah. And so I don't keep saying, I've had 8 years of studying at university, and I've got a master's degree, and I'm a teacher, and I've got a background in ministry and theology and religious studies. Because it's boring. It's boring and it's tedious, and it sounds as if I'm showing off. I'm not showing off, but sometimes people are asking. They want to know, what authority do you have to say this? Do you know what you're talking about? And I don't really at all. I mean, I do. Yes, I studied for a long time, and that is interesting. The one thing that I did learn was that I know very little. The more I learn, the more I realise how little I know. And the other thing I learned is that the answer is never in studying. You're always left seeking. There's always more to learn and understand. Always more questions. The mind won't get you there. And although it can be stimulating, it can be mentally stimulating, all these ideas to play with, but it doesn't satisfy. It's not edifying unless it's of the heart, unless it's an experience. And I tried explaining this to this person, and they just didn't get it because they didn't understand the purpose of the channel. The purpose of the channel is to come home to who we really are through experience. And non-duality always starts with experience, you see. Isn't about studying academically, and it isn't about left brain intellectual knowledge. It always starts with self-inquiry, and that is, who is the one that is looking out at the world? Who is the one that is experiencing? And so when you begin, you'll say, well, it's Jill, or whoever you are, you'll say, it's me. And then you'll keep exploring that idea, and you ask, well, where does the consciousness come? Where can I find the source of it then? Is the source of it in this body? If this body is Jill, where is consciousness? Where is that person that witnesses and looks out at the world? Are they in the where of the brain? Is it the neurons firing in my brain? And this is certainly the Newtonian model of physics, that the physical world came first, and people and animals and people, and then somehow consciousness came secondary to materialism. This is the materialist model. But that's being displaced now by a consciousness first model. Consciousness is not a secondary, because the material scientists can't explain that. So we're kind of stuck with this problem, the hard problem. And it's what's really brought about a resurgence of interest, I think. This inadequacy of materialism that's brought about this interest in non-duality, which is really looking at consciousness. When I step back from the story of Jill and just allow the background, allow myself to sink into the background, then I can kind of feel a sense of peace. What I find there is just a peace and love, and a sort of releasing of all the worries and all the anxiety and all the attachments. And this background is always there. And this background is the same for all of us, same for you, same for me. We sort of step into the story and the character and the events and happenings and the timeline and everything of life. But when we choose, we can just step out of the story. And when we do that, we experience this beingness, consciousness, just reality that is untroubled, untouched by life. It's a bit like the white screen on the cinema, all the different events and dramas play out on the screen. It might be a rom-com, it might be a war film, it might be a horror film, an action movie. But when the movie stops, the screen is still there. It's still untouched. It's pure. It's a clear screen. Let me show you. Just reminded me of a card that I had. And it's just a clear, blank sheet. And the psalm for that goes something like, cleanse me with hyssop and I will be clean, wash me and I'll be whiter than snow. It's this idea of purification. And of course, this idea of purification is, being cleansed from the sins, wrongdoings and so on that separate us from God. And in a way, it's sort of, it's the busyness of life, it's the stuff of life. If we just wash all that away and take a step back to the blank screen of awareness, it's a pure, clean state. It's a clean screen. And that's union with God, but not being separated by the story, by the character and the doings and the goings on and all of that, the conflicts and the resistances and the competition and all the things that happen in life. There's just the blank screen. And it's sort of open and ever-present, non-judgmental, constant, and its nature is love. And it feels that way. So this brings me to saying, we can't arrive there in the head, we can only experience it. And I love this idea of it being the background. But I also love this word dwell. It's like rest or dwell in the background. Just give yourself time off from the story, from your life. And how does this happen for us? How do we have this sense of this reality, this beingness, this effortless beingness? Well, it can happen for us sometimes just spontaneously, quite spontaneously, often in nature. If we're just having a relaxing experience, maybe it takes us by surprise. We might just be sitting in a garden looking out, or a beautiful scene, and we sort of feel as though we're at one with nature. We kind of blend into our natural surroundings and we feel at peace, feel restored. So that can be one way in which we experience it. I think children experience it quite naturally. When you watch young children or have memories even of childhood yourself, there's this sort of playfulness that's completely free. It's not inhibited by ego, any sort of sense of what must people think of me and how I have to behave. It's just experiencing, and it's joyful experiencing. I can remember my son, who is now 17, and he was always dancing and laughing and, I don't know, just playing around, full of joy. And it was incredible to watch him. You'd think, he's just exuberant. Exuberance is the word that comes to mind. And then, of course, he becomes more self-conscious, as they do when they grow up. Ego is developing. Ego awareness is developing. And he went through quite a shy time, quite a difficult time, where he felt socially awkward, as many do. And we're quite concerned about him. And that child, that playful child, is long gone. But then he's come out of that now, and he's starting to find himself, and he's growing up, and yeah, he's okay. He's still quite self-conscious because he's a teenager. But the point is, where did that child go? Well, it's there in the background. It's there because it's just beingness experience itself, or as non-duality would say, it's God having an experience of life in a dualistic sort of simulation. Not that it's not real. When we talk about life being an illusion or a dream, it's not that it's not real, but there is a reality behind the duality that is more constant and more real than the drama that's playing out. And that reality is a shared reality. It's just beingness, consciousness itself, or God. And so what comes to mind for me that when I heard a non-dual teacher talk about the background, just resting into the background, I thought about this word dwell. And I heard Rupert Spira talking just recently about how meditation is a way of finding that beingness. But it's so hard. Many people just don't stop. They won't take 5 minutes to be quiet and sit in silence. And I think he said if the world sat, if everyone in the world, all the people on the planet were to sit in silence for 5 minutes, the problems of the world would disappear. Because what happens when we sit in silence is that experience changes. We almost feel this detachment from the story. We feel this peace come upon us. We feel loved. We feel this intimacy that we don't always sense from the word universe. Some people say, oh, the universe. I think of the universe as like a kind of poster on the wall at school with all the planets on, and that just doesn't feel something I can relate to or feel that have a relationship with. But it's just trying to get this idea of scale, the infinity of this being that is the ground of all being. And that is indivisible, so it's the ground of my being and your being and all that is. And that oneness that we can experience and get a sense of when we're quiet and still, and we still the mind, is our true nature. We're just touching base with our true nature. Another time that it sometimes may happen for us is in times of real trauma, sudden trauma. I don't know if you've had this experience, but you may find yourself sort of in a hospital waiting room or something, just suddenly waiting for the doctor to come out to give you the verdict on what has happened with whoever it is that's just been rushed into. When something unexpected happens and it's traumatic and it turns your life upside down, and you get this sense of, is this real? Is this really happening? And there's a sort of standing back from the story, almost like people describe in near-death experience, where they're almost separate from the body. And I don't mean that you see that separation, but you just have, it's as though everything's in slow motion and consciousness changes somehow. You access a different form of consciousness that almost as though it's just wanting to protect you a little bit from the pain of it, the severity of the pain of it, so it sort of like opens its arms for you to rest back into. And you're a kind of observer, you're more aware of being an observer of these events happening. There's a sort of detachment from it. And that might be, as I say, self-preservation, because it's too painful. But there is a sort of peace that is found there. There is this sense of all is well, all will be well. All manner of things will be well. And that's beingness, the background beingness, the white screen that's untouched by trauma. And that is God. That is dwelling in the presence. And why is it presence? Because it is loving. It feels loving. And it's got nothing to do with belief. It's got nothing to do with theism about praying and asking God to help you. And sometimes those things happen spontaneously in those situations. And we do pray. We just do pray. But maybe we're just returning. Maybe we're just connecting consciously to the returning ground of being, because it's an innate impulse in us. But I have another card just to show you, and it's this card about the dwelling in the tents. It's from Psalm 15:1. You see the tents there? I'm going to read that to you. And the psalm says, Lord, who may sojourn in your tent, sojourn, rest, who may rest in your tent, or journey, or go to your tent, or dwell, who may dwell on your holy mountain. The divine who invites each of us to experience deeper and deeper intimacy says, throw your arms around me and don't let go. Well, that's again couched in dualistic language. Throw your arms around me and don't let go. Or it could be the everlasting arms that are throwing themselves around you and not letting you go. The point is, because we are in this dualistic world experience story, we think of this dwelling to be a place. And certainly, in the Israelites in Jewish history, they had the tent as a dwelling place. They had the Ark of the Covenant that they carried around with them. And in our own way, we each have these tents, these arks that we build, because we might think that we'll find God in a creed, in a spiritual practice, in a particular teacher that we follow, or in wanting, academic study, evidence about the historical Jesus and texts, and we think that's where we'll find the answer in all of it, or in scripture itself. So there's always a place place, people, things, objects, ideas, philosophy, ideology, spirituality itself. We can become addicted to spirituality, and actually it defies being objectified in that way. It defies any definition. It's just there. Where can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths, you are there. It's still dualistic language, you, me, as though we're subject-object, but we're not. And that's non-duality. And the story of the scriptures and the psalmist is just trying to, and all the Bible stories are just trying to explain in dualistic terms this experience of beingness. The problem is we can think it's about a seeking and a finding, and it really isn't, because it's already here. And all we have to do is stop, take some time out from the story and just dwell, just be. It isn't about calling angels in. It isn't about doing something so that you can be clean and therefore the separation between yourself and God can be, resolved. It's just about being. Nothing to do. Just being aware and resting. And in the resting, in the dwelling place, metaphorically, in that space of being still, you find peace, you find love. It's already there. I hope this was helpful. Tell me about your experiences of feeling this connection. And it isn't really a connection, because that's two things that need to be connected. It's just having this experience of peace, love, intimacy, dwelling. And if you haven't had that experience, then try it. Try it. This is non-duality. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless. See you next time.